Should we move things like in around? Oops, I bumped it.
That's okay.
Should we move things like around so it feels like time's passing quicker? And then when you fast forward, it's like, whoa, where'd these things come from?
In this video, I'm making steamed buns, which I've never made before. It starts out with a failure, which I work around and turn into a success by round 2. Right now, I'm making the dough. The mixture that was on the table before, that was the yeast sugar water mixture. I get my flour all ready, just using regular all-purpose flour, then I pour in the yeasty mixture. You might be able to see that it's really sticky, and so I add some flour to it. And the thing is, it's not supposed to be this sticky. If anything, from the research I did, it was supposed to be on the dry side. So I should have known by that point that it wasn't going to be a very good dough, but I had high hopes. So I proceed with covering it. I let it rise in a warm room for about an hour. Meanwhile, I start preparing the meat mixture. This recipe was kind of frustrating to make because it seemed like a lot of things were working against me throughout the first attempt. The first being the dough issue, although I didn't know it was an actual problem at this point. Another is that I was supposed to start out with 12 ounces of ground pork, but all I could find were larger cuts of it. So I cut it up super small and then I smashed it in order to get that kind of ground up consistency. Later on, I learned that it's not absolutely essential to have the stuff ground up. It's useful as far as making the filling a unified mass, but the most important thing is just to make sure the meat is cooked all the way through, whether it's ground or not. Right now, I'm just kind of smashing the meat together. Then I start seasoning it. A minced clove of garlic, a teaspoon or so of grated ginger, a tablespoon of soy sauce, quarter teaspoon salt, tablespoon hoisin sauce, tablespoon of vinegar. I used apple cider vinegar just because it was handy, 2 teaspoons cornstarch, and 2 tablespoons of sesame oil. I mix that all up, then add half a cup of water gradually so that it becomes a unified slurry. You're now going to see my attempts at folding. I didn't know exactly what kind of consistency it was supposed to be, so it seemed like it was going to be just fine. Another challenge with this first version I did is that I didn't have a rolling pin, so I just smashed it with the palm of my hand on the counter. I'm going to slow it down here so you can see that the folding goes pretty well. Like, it's not too shabby. Everything fits and it all seems to stick together. And though it is kind of a struggle, I mean, it was really the best one of that bunch. I think now you'll see that it's truly an awful dough to work with. Like, it just was not at all the texture it was supposed to be. Oh my gosh, so I've got a hole in that one that I try to patch up so bad. I don't know how the first one seemed to turn out so good. It's just a mess. But I still felt like I could salvage something. So I go through and keep making these cute little packages, and they're all so awful. So I don't have very much footage displaying it, but you'll see kind of the aftermath of what they look like when they're steamed, and just how the texture of the dough is completely wrong. Like, it should be fluffy, but instead it's all gummy and it's just not right. And I figured that the reason for that could have been one or two things. I thought maybe it was because I shouldn't have used all-purpose flour, maybe that was the issue. But also, I had watched a video from Binging with Babish recently where he was trying to make bread, and he kept measuring by volume and kept failing. And as soon as he measured by weight, he made a beautiful loaf of bread. And so I thought, yeah, how about I do that? I test out those theories for my second attempt. So I measure everything by weight instead of by volume. And I get flour that's specifically for making buns. As it turns out, I didn't really need to use bun flour after all. I've tried the recipe since then, and all-purpose flour works perfectly fine. The true lifesaver when making the dough really is just to measure by weight. Other things I did wrong in my first attempt that I'll advise against is I also didn't have parchment paper, and I thought that instead I would use dry rice to prevent the buns from sticking to the bottom of the steamer. The thing is, the steamer partially cooked the rice and made it stick to the bottom of the buns. So there was all this super al dente rice coating the base of the buns, rendering those parts inedible. So I made sure I had parchment paper the next day. Another mistake was not making sure I had a rolling pin, because I really needed that to make the edges of the dough thin enough to fold easily. That was something I amended too. I went out and got a rolling pin. Another thing was the type of steamer I was using. I used a straight up rice cooker / veggie steamer type thing, which was real heavy duty and basically drenched the buns in water. So for my second try, I went out and got an actual bamboo steamer. It's something I'd been thinking of getting for a while now, so it didn't seem like it would be a once-off use for me. So here's my next attempt, measuring almost everything out by weight. I use 3/4 cups of warm water, 3 grams instant yeast, 30 grams white sugar. I stirred that to dissolve, then I waited 15 minutes for the yeast to bloom. After that, I added 1 tablespoon of vegetable oil, 300 grams of all-purpose flour, 20 grams of cornstarch, 3 grams salt, and 1 gram of baking soda. I mixed that together in a bowl until I was able to turn it out onto a clean surface and kneaded it until it was one solid ball of dough. As soon as I combined the yeasty water and the flour together, it immediately made a much better dough. After I let it rise for about an hour, it was already a nice bready texture, which was just so awesome compared to the day before. And when I started rolling everything out, it wasn't overly sticky, it was just perfect. And using the rolling pin was so nice because I could get those really thin edges. I had a lot of meat mixture from the day before, so I was able to continue using that, which was pretty awesome. From my experience, because I haven't had a lot of practice in doing this, making the edges come together like this, it always is a little bit hard. I made these buns again recently and, it's not always cute. But regardless of how picturesque the buns look when they're freshly folded up, the steamer makes them plump up and look so tasty. And even though it's a relatively labor-intensive recipe, it's such a special thing to make from scratch. So now I've got these laid out all beautiful in the bamboo steamer with parchment paper. It was already a much better job than I'd done last time. After settling everything in together, you let it rise once more for maybe 15 or 20 minutes before you cook it. I let it do that, then sealed up any gaps that seemed to be opening up too wide, and then I proceeded with cooking them. And check these out. They're huge, and they're the right texture, and the insides are all fully cooked. It was just totally worth the effort.